Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Monday Afternoon Journal Club. Ed Bowder and Dan Schwester here from the
Everybody.
Overrun, and the Monday Afternoon Journal Club
Yeah.
is on the bleeding edge of current data.
We sure are, Ed. It's all
Oh,
about
boy, do
blood.
I have jokes. So today we're going to talk about TXA. We're going to talk about two
Yeah.
different studies that are very, very interesting. And this is coming out of the New England Journal of Medicine. This is from 2023. This is the Patch Trauma Investigators, pre-hospital trauma, tranexamic acid for severe trauma. Great acronym for the study group. And what they did was they looked at whether or not people have improved survivability when they receive TXA in the field. We are going to go over two papers today, so we're just going to glaze over this. Total of 1,310 patients with 15 EMS services in Australia, New Zealand, and Germany. 661 to the TXA group, 646 to the placebo group.
Good
What we really
numbers.
want to talk about here, good numbers. Essentially what the bottom line of this study finds, and they find this in the outcomes, was that when you gave TXA, it did not improve 6-month outcomes, right? So
Okay.
over the course, after you receive TXA, in 6 months, you're just as likely to die, to expire, or to have morbidity as any other patient. And that's true in this data set, right? So you look through this, and specifically, we're going to talk about these secondary outcomes here. But in the primary outcomes here, right, it just talks about patients who had abbreviated injury scores, who lived and who died. And now we're the ones who will tell their story. So in looking at
Wow.
this, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Somebody watched the Tonys this week. So in this TXA group, what I think is interesting here is the first note, right, is by 24 hours after injury, 64 of the 657 patients, about 10% of the TXA group, and about 15% in the placebo group had died. So that's 24-hour mortality, right? So 10% one way or the other.
Sure.
Then you get into 28-day mortality, which is about 17% for the TXA group, 22% for the placebo group. And then once you get into the 6-month, that's when you start seeing 19% in TXA and 22% in placebo. So by 6 months, you have a 3%, 4% higher survivability of placebo over TXA. And then here we have these vascular events. 24% occurred in patients who received TXA over placebo. Now, what we like about this is a pre-hospital study, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hell yeah.
Love it.
Pre-hospital data set. Let's go. What's interesting is that 6 months later, these patients are not surviving, right? So that's where we have to start kind of having this conversation of, all right, well, what are we doing that's actually causing benefit? Are we causing benefit? So we have to look at further data, which brings us to this article that comes out of Annals, and this was in May of 2024. Again, this is a similar group. This is a group of authors from South Africa and Australia, and what they looked at was TXA in traumatic injury in the emergency setting, and did a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized control trials. So where between 2023 and 2024, where are we at with the data? We have this pre-hospital meta-analysis, and now we have this systemic review and meta-analysis from a year later. So this article, this is from Foch et al. I'm sorry, Dr. Foch, if I'm mispronouncing your last name. They mention in here, they do a very similar analysis, and here they show the synthesis demonstrates that TXA used for trauma in emergencies leads to a reduction in 1-month mortality with no significant evidence of problematic vascular occlusive events. Giving TXA in the pre-hospital setting is associated with reduced mortality compared to in-hospital administration, and less mortality with TXA in systemic trauma is noted compared with traumatic brain injury specifically. Right. So we have two pieces of data. One says that it doesn't make a difference at 6 months, and one says that it does improve outcomes at 1 month, which is supported by the other article. The question now, what is EMS's role in hemorrhage control, right? This is what it comes down to, is because now we have some confusing data. In the end, what we're there to do is to assist the patient in surviving to receive further intervention. So what these data suggest to me is that TXA is an effective drug in the pre-hospital arena.
I agree.
All right, cool. Good talk. Thanks for coming to the Journal Club. We did that.
No, I was waiting for you to come back.
It's important, right?
Hold on.
So with looking at the 1 month mortality, that's what we're going for.
Sure.
Right? In 6 months, a patient that has a traumatic injury is probably going to get sepsis. And what that one study doesn't do is it doesn't differentiate
run over by a bus as they're
Right.
leaving the hospital. We don't
Yeah.
know, Ed. Here's the thing. We know that TXA, and I think the data is extant. I'm going to steal your
Data is
line.
extant.
That TXA does improve survival up to a certain point. I also think that the evidence is very clear that it doesn't cause prothrombotic events. So we don't have to worry about DVTs or blood clots or thromboses because someone gave TXA in the field. That's not what it does. That's not how it acts. Down the road, this is what I don't like about this study is that they never delineated what exactly did these people die from? Do we
Right.
know how do we know how they died? Because right now you're telling me, hey, those people are alive at 1 month, but some people aren't alive at 6 months. My question is, what happened? Okay. And
Right.
if my trauma patient is alive after a month after I gave them TXA, I got to look at it as a positive.
No, absolutely. And I think that, and also it's the administration of the drug too,
Right.
right? In the patch study, the patients received, the bolus of TXA and then the drip of TXA was given appropriately. And I worry that looking at these data suggest that TXA has some 6 month long, effect from whatever. And
Yeah,
I
it's
understand
not a
that.
6 month time bomb that kills these people.
Right. Yeah. And
Something
it's
else
different than looking at,
happened.
yeah. And it's different than looking at cardiac arrest outcomes, right?
Absolutely.
Where cardiac arrest outcomes, in the overwhelming majority of cases, there was something physiologic or some pathology that
Agreed.
patient had that caused that MI or that caused that cardiac arrest event. So even after we resuscitate that patient, we have to fix that problem, right? If I'm driving my car and I get a flat tire, I can fix the flat tire. But if my car's engine doesn't work, it doesn't matter what I do unless I get the engine fixed, right?
Agreed.
So if someone has an MI that leads to a VF arrest and then they get resuscitated, great. They need to be cathed. They need all this other stuff to fix them. In trauma patients, and the mean age in these studies was low, like everyone was below 40. In these studies, you typically have people who are generally healthy. And I am speaking in broad strokes. I'm not, you're always going to have that outlier 25-year-old who has an autoimmune disease and, whatever.
But for the most part, trauma patients are young and healthy because they're out doing risky things that end up getting them hurt.
Yeah, or it's just living data. Like driving a vehicle is one of the most dangerous things statistically that you can do. So you'll get these patients that don't necessarily have this pathology, but they have this traumatic injury. We give them TXA to fix them. Downstream, the problems that they're going to have don't necessarily relate to EMS care or to TXA. If I have a patient who has a femur fracture, right, and they have an exsanguinous injury, they're hypotensive, and I give them TXA, right? Let's say it's an open fracture. So I give them this TXA. After I drop that patient off, they're going to be in a hospital, which is full of sick people and thus full of pathogens and fomites and all that other stuff. Then they're going to have to go to at least one, possibly several surgeries that involve foreign body placement. And after that, then they have to go through the recovery phase.
Great.
So I'm willing to accept that between days 28 and month 6, there's myriad events that could happen that would contribute to someone's death.
And here's another point. For them to get to that 6-month mortality, they had to survive.
Right.
They had to
and that's exactly it.
And survive the initial insult and now get to that point where, all these other things are happening. I don't know this is an indictment of TXA.
No, it's not. And that's kind of the argument that I think we're trying to make here is if you compare a patient, let's say you have you have 2 patients who have been shot. Yeah. Right. One patient was shot in the right upper extremity, right up here. Uh-huh. They nicked, their one of their great vessels, right? One of the large veins. Yeah,
brachial arteries.
Or they nicked one of their arteries, whatever.
Sure.
I give them TXA. That bleeding, direct pressure or whatever else, that bleeding stops. They have an orthopedic injury, right? That can be worked with and whatever else. But that's really the issue, right? I get shot in the shoulder. I've got a humerus injury. I've got a deltoid. I've got to fix, right? All that other stuff. That patient was never moribund, right? We give them TXA. Their 28-day outcome is very, very good. And thus their 6-month mortality is very good because they weren't moribund to begin with. that patient gets lumped into the same data set as a patient who took a 45 to the box and, had an involvement with their aorta.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a large caliber projectile goes through their lung parenchyma and, let's say, a great vessel, and it doesn't exit, right? Or, someone gets hit with a 22 and it just bounces all through the torso.
I agree.
Those are different injury processes.
I think that's the limitation of this study, is that they didn't go into what the causes of mortality were at 28 days.
Right.
I don't like it. I listen, I love all research and I appreciate the efforts of every researcher.
I love all of my studies equally.
But we're not there with this one. This is not ready for prime time. Because
I think that's right. I think
they didn't explain why those people died and what the effect TXA had on them. Remember,
and that's absolutely right.
Remember, they had to get to 28 days to survive that initial insult.
Right. Yeah. And again, you see that extra 15% that's involved between day 29 and month 6. I appreciate and I respect the data that we're trying to find here. Any data is important. I think that what we find is that the data currently support giving TXA in the pre-hospital environment.
I agree.
I think it supports maintaining that treatment once you get to the ER, which is something that needs to be done at every hospital, especially if you are going to be receiving patients that get TXA. But I think these are two fairly recent data sets that there's a million ways that you can look at them, but I think in the end, it supports the use of TXA in the pre-hospital arena. And I've yet to see anything significant that really shows that's different. But let us know what you guys think. Are we using TXA in the field? Have we been successful? What type of systems are we implementing when we give TXA in the field? Does the trauma department get notified ahead of time? Are they set up? We want to know how your different systems work, and make sure to subscribe to all of it, everything down here on YouTube, and check out overrunems.com. Check out all of our stories on ems1.com as well. And for the Overrun, Ed Bowder and Dan Schwester at the Monday Afternoon Journal Club, we will talk to you next week.
Take care.